Alright, so the way to do that piece is to just click it, hold Control, click it again, just to make sure that you have it selected, and hit this Convert to Symbol option in your pop-up menu. And so the Convert to Symbol panel comes up, and under Type here, it gives you all these options. Okay, so Movie Clip, Button, and Graphic. Movie Clip and Button are the only two that we're going to be going over for the project, and they're very slightly different. And they're slightly different in the way in which they animate, and that's pretty much about it. You can kind of apply ActionScript to both of them, meaning that you can make them interactive in any type of way that Animate allows. It's a good idea to name your symbol, but you don't necessarily have to. So in this case, I'm just going to hit OK and just go with the default name. So once you have the symbol created, and I'm zooming in here, you can see the pasteboard kind of coming up here on the side, just in black. You can see this little center point. This center point really is the point of reference for the object. So if I am to go to Modify and Transform, and then select Free Transform, I'm going to be able to kind of drag the corners of this and resize it. Okay, this is just like with Photoshop files or raster graphics. You're not going to want to make them larger. You're going to want to make them smaller. Making them smaller will prevent you from losing any resolution to your image. Okay. Despite this being, a digital piece, and the screen resolution in the digital kind of world is less than that of print, it's still something to consider for sure. So after I have selected my transform tool on this movie clip symbol, I can hover over this center point now, and it's actually movable. So I can move it over to this corner, and as I then resize this object, by holding Shift, I can constrain its proportions. Otherwise, it just kind of moves around to where it wants. I can constrain it to that corner. So remember, the transform tool will allow you to move this anchor point any which way, any corner on this document, or even outside of the corners. It's just your point of reference for resizing and things like that. So I can just nudge this background in a couple times just to get it straight. So this object here, I'm actually going to just click a keyframe to about frame 50, and not a keyframe, sorry, it's actually just going to be a regular frame, because this object is going to be a just solid state background. It's not going to move, okay? So I'm going to go to frame 50 and Control click here, and I'm going to say Insert Frame, right? Because if I were to insert a keyframe, that would mean that I'm going to change the art in some way. Okay, it's going to move or something like that, maybe change color or something. So in this case, I'm going to be happy with that. I'll lock up this layer. The first thing I'm going to do is actually rename this. So renaming layers is very simple. Just double click it and name it what you want. And so then I'll lock it up. So the next thing to do, so this is a PNG file, but the artwork obviously is completely opaque in the background as far as with colored pixels. This next object I want to drag in, I want to create a new layer to do it. I'm going to call this flower. And this next object is, and I'll open it up in preview here. This has a transparent background to it. Okay, this is a pathed out version of the same flower on the desktop. So what I'll do is select this first frame on my timeline on frame 1 for the flower layer. This is kind of where it gets a little bit tricky. You're going to have kind of multiple layers. Making sure things are clicked where they need to be is a good thing to have. Or to have a grasp of. So I'll just drag this piece in, So now it ends up, I'll click off of it for a second. So actually, it ends up falling onto layer 1 exactly where it needed to be. And again, the way to know that you have artwork on a certain layer is that it has this solid black circle. It's not hollow like it starts out as. And again, first thing I'm going to do is convert this to a symbol. So Control-click, convert to symbol. And I'll just call it that. All right. Let me see if I can. Sorry. So for this object, then I'm going to actually go modify. I have my free transform already set, so I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So you can see that the bounding box for this object is, again, a lot larger than the object itself, but the background pixels are transparent. So Animate is allowing me to work with transparent imagery. And I'll take this off of the pasteboard. I'm still at this frame here, and then artwork is consistently going all the way across. So the reason why I've been converting all these objects to symbols, or movie clip symbols rather, is because I want to actually make this move across my screen or spin or change color and use all the properties that a movie clip symbol allows you to use in Animate. So that's really what I want to demonstrate today. So what I'm going to do is have this object over here off the screen, and my idea is that I want to bring this object into the scene and then kind of float across, okay? But not on a straight path. I want it to be more of a windy path. So first I'll show you kind of how the workflow would be with a straight path. So I'm going to go to frame 50, let's just say, and I'm going to hit Control-click on there, and I'm going to go to Insert Keyframe. Okay. So again, inserting a keyframe on a layer will make an exact copy of that artwork on the layer in another point in the timeline. So as you can see here, frame 50 versus frame 1. So for frame 50, I want this object to end up clear on the other side of the pasteboard between frame 1 and 50 on my timeline here. So I can do that. So I'm at frame 50, that's where I'm going to end. And then going to frame 1 down here is where I'm going to begin. So I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see it better. So beginning, end, before and after. So the only other piece I need to do is create the tween. So create the slides in between the two points, before and after. So Control-clicking the timeline between the two keyframes that I want to have tweened will do that. And then Control-clicking and hitting Create Classic Tween will create this arrow that kind of goes across from one frame to the other, showing that this is a functioning tween. So again, this is just going from one side to the other at a very average pace. Well, what pace is that really? It's 24 frames per second. Okay, so this is like a 2-second video in reality, because we're dealing with 50 frames at 24 frames per second. So one thing you can do, and I'll remove this tween. So you can, and that's a good, interesting point too. You can actually Control-click an existing tween and actually remove it. So remove classic tween will take you back to where we started. So you can do that as well. Let me then actually add this tween, and I want to show you how you can actually edit your keyframes while you have your tween already, I'll say, connected or applied here. So if I go to frame 50 and I say, instead of ending up here in my video, I want to end this object down here, you can see that the tween actually adheres to my change. And then if I were to go to frame 1 and say, okay, I want it to start up here, and then hit return to play again, you can see that the tween actually, applied to the change. So you don't have to remove tweens to make changes, but sometimes, you might want to. So just knowing that you can do it is probably helpful. Another thing you can do with movie clip symbols is, let's just say we'd like to, from point 1 or frame 1 to frame 50, we want this object to enlarge in size. So all I would do in this instance is actually enlarge frame 50 and then keep frame 1 smaller and then create my tween between those two frames by going Control-click, create classic tween. And then so what Animate's going to do is then show the object all steps in between animating. If I wanted to keep my tween that way and then say, you know what, I'm going to move this to the center of my composition at frame 50, and then I'll jump to frame 1 and then move this to the center of my composition at frame 1, then it looks like my flower is actually kind of growing in my video. Okay, so scale is something that you can tween. All right, let's see what else. So we'll keep the scale piece on there. It's just moving straight in that straight line across the way. Now what I'm going to do is actually apply a clipping path to this, because remember my original concept was I want to have this kind of swirling in and out of the frame. I don't want it to move just straight ahead. So I'll click on the flower layer and then hit Control-click on that entire layer. You can see the whole layer selecting here. You're going to want to hit Add Classic Motion Guide. And so this option will add this new layer on top of the flower layer. And so the way you know it's working is this flower layer becomes indented. And then the guide flower layer has this little motion path symbol on top of it, and it is outdent. There's an outdent from that to the flower layer. So I'll replay my animation again, and it's working just fine. So the thing I want to do is actually click on this open area for art on the guide flower layer, and then keep that selected on my frame 1. This is the point where I'm actually going to be able to draw my motion guide. So I'll hit my pen tool, and really I'm just going to figure out what path do I want this thing to take, across my art. So I'm just going to start drawing a path, and it looks like this flower is sort of locked onto it a little bit, but it's still going in that straight, that path that I don't want it to go. I want it to follow the path of this green line. So what I'm going to have to do is actually go to the flower layer and click on frame 1. I'll grab my selection tool. And so I'm actually going to physically drag and connect this object to the tip of this this line at the beginning of its journey and at the end. So at the beginning, I'm going to drag this over and then put it at the beginning where I want it to start. And then this part, I'm going to see if I can attach it to the end. All right, so I just lined up the middle point of this object here. You can kind of see it with a white crosshair. And then the same on this end. So on each of these keyframes are connected now. And then if you hit return or enter, you can see that the object is actually doing two things. It's following the defined path, but then it's also very subtly growing, at the same time. So now we're kind of mixing a couple things together. Now, of course, we probably don't want this green line, being visible on here. It's understandable. So for this guide flower layer, what I can do is actually put this, click on this eyeball icon, this dot right beneath the eyeball icon in my layers palette, and then just make that disappear. And so it's invisible, but it's still functioning properly, and then I'll hit the lock too, just so it doesn't accidentally get changed. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to see if I can actually adjust this path a little bit here and see if that's still applied. Yeah, so what I did was actually used my sub-selection tool onto the clipping path, and then I was able to then sort of tweak the path a little bit as well. Just like you would in Illustrator. In Illustrator, tools, you can just kind of pull this pen path and then see this thing change its path. All right. What else? Something else that is interesting that you can do is, let's say I wanted this object not to be at such a constant speed, right? Like I want it to be at a more natural speed. So what you can do is adjust what's called easing in your animations. So there's two properties. It's called ease in and ease out. So ease out is sort of like a car taking off from a complete stop. It's sort of slow at first, and then it speeds up and it is quicker towards the end. Easing in is like a car coming full speed and then coming to a complete stop later on, so it slows down towards the end. So the way to do easing is you would actually click on your tween in the timeline, and then you could go over to your properties palette. This is the one palette that is constantly changing in Animate based on what you have going on here, or what you have selected on the palette, what kind of tools you're working with, etc. So in my properties palette, over here you're going to see this column when you have your ease selected on the timeline, tweening. So this category called tweening, and then you can see this object here called classic ease, and it says ease type when you roll over it. You're going to see this little number next to it, and it says easing intensity. So what you would do is actually click on this, and you could pull it to the left, and this would be easing in. So this will actually slow down towards the end. Oh. Actually, no, it's gonna be slow in the beginning, and then it's gonna speed up at the end. And then easing out will be the opposite. It's going to be faster in the beginning and then slower at the end. So then if I bring this number all the way down to 100, you're going to see this word out, and then it's going to be faster in the beginning and then slower at the end. So adjusting that option will give you just kind of a little, just kind of some subtle differences in the speed of animations. Maybe you don't want to go 100, but maybe you want to go like 75 or something like that. And then maybe your other animations, you'll have it at a different speed, and so on and so forth. Maybe some will ease in and some will ease out, things like that. So that's an option as well to kind of differentiate a little bit some of your animations there. Down below, what I can do in the timeline is actually I can move this whole animation around. I can actually even squeeze pieces of it to make this video shorter in frames, thus making the animations actually faster, but still keeping the easing in properties and easing out. So I'll try that. I'm going to actually select all of these frames, and I'm going to hover over the right edge here. And I'm going to click and hold that I'm sorry. Yeah, that right edge. I'm like, is that the right edge or the left? That's the right edge. So I'm going to click and hold the end of that timeline there. All of my layers selected together, and I can compress them down like this, and then so I have to kind of hover over and hold it, and then if I hit return, you can see it's way faster, but it's still easing out at the end of the animation. Another thing I can do is I'll unlock these layers, and what I want to do actually now is, let's say I want to make my job easier, and I know that I'm going to have the same kind of thing happening with these flowers, except I want it to have a couple more, right? So I'll select all my layers, except for the background, because I don't need that one. I just want the flower and the path that it's on to be duplicated. So I'll actually control-click here in the Layers palette and go Duplicate Layers. And it's going to make an exact copy of those on top. And if I select Layer 1, as all these are selected at the same time, if I select, Frame 1 on this new layer, I can actually bring it over to a different point in the timeline right here. So now the animation, now as you can see, the background kind of disappeared. So that's a piece I have to consider. But at the end of the day, the animation is sort of staggered, so I'm having two copies of the same animation happening at the same time. The piece, though, that I need to do is add a background frame at this point in the animation, frame 40, because when I compressed it, the background image compressed as well. So all I need to do is go to frame 40 and then insert my frame. So this is my constant image in the background throughout this whole animation. Another thing I want to consider is some differentiation between these two layers. So one thing I might want to do is actually lock this first guide flower layer down, and then change up the guide flower copy clipping path that I have created there to just kind of give some differentiation and see what happens. So what I'm going to do is actually unhide that clipping path for that new layer that I created, or that new animation. And I'm going to hide that initial flower too, so that doesn't really get too confusing. And then I'm going to go to my sub-selection tool again, just like your direct selection tool, and I'll select some of these points. So I'm going to shift-click and select these points to kind of move them around here, and then just change up the path a little bit of that the journey this flower is going to take, right? And then I'll hit enter or return, and then just kind of see what happens there. I'm good with this so far. It's just moving really fast, so I'm just gonna select all of these and see if I can just extend this video a little bit longer. So one of the things I would definitely consider doing is, let me move this up a bit. Let me add a frame. One of the things I would consider doing is really adjusting the timing of your stuff later, and not really worrying about timing too much now, but just worry about that later, and then that you'll really, that'll be very helpful to you. Adjusting the timing later as you've locked down the tweens and what you want them to be doing, okay? All right, so maybe for the second piece, I want to show an animation within an animation, okay? So one of these object symbols here, and I'll hide the background really quick to make it a little bit more clear. So I'm going to select, let's say, this large movie clip symbol here. Now this is an instance, so just like in InDesign, we were able to place multiple instances of one file in InDesign. Okay, that file being the PSD file, you were able to place it multiple times in InDesign, but then you were able to turn on and off layers on that individual piece to show or hide different colors or layers within your Photoshop file. The idea is that I could have 5 different colors of one shoe in one file and just place that file 5 times. This is a very similar concept, except what we're using is a symbol that's in the library. So I have quite a few objects here floating around and so on and so forth, and this changing sizes and so on. But essentially, at the end of the day, this symbol is there's one symbol. There's one symbol with multiple instances of it on my on my artwork here. So what you could essentially do is modify all of these at the same time by double-clicking this object. Let me just get my selection tool. So you want your selection tool selected. And then if I double-click this object, you can see my timeline down below cleared out. So this means that I'm inside of this object's timeline. And there is only one frame on this timeline that essentially, in the background, if you can imagine, is looping over and over and over again. So let me just kind of demonstrate, okay? I'll give this a save on my desktop. So let's say I was good with this movie, right? I'll go to File Export and Export Movie. And I'm going to export the SWF file onto my desktop. And I'll hit Save. And on my desktop, here's my SWF file. And I'll double click it. So now you can see my movie is happening. Here's my sample file, right? My working document has the background totally hidden. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be produced in this SWF file. Also, what you'll notice is that this animation is constantly moving. It's never stopping. So I'm going through the timeline that we've created in Animate, and I'm seeing this movie play out over and over and over and over again, okay? So very much like this main timeline, that same concept applies for the internal timeline of this object. So if I double-click this object, I am seeing this object loop in its own timeline over and over and over again. And what it's looping is frame 1 of its own timeline, which is the same object over and over again. So if I were to say, okay, for this object, I want it to have an animation independent of my main animation, right? So I want to have an animation of an object within an animation, then I would just actually make those changes in my timeline. That's why they're calling it a movie clip symbol, because essentially this object is a movie clip within the movie itself. So to demonstrate, I'm going to go to frame 25, and I'm going to control click it, and I'm going to insert keyframe. And so this is a keyframe within this object. And what I'll do is click on this keyframe. Actually, hold on a second. I might have to, let me undo that. One thing I actually have to do when I'm in this symbol is actually convert it. I'll have to convert this artwork to a symbol, because if I go to my properties palette with this object selected, even though I'm inside of a movie clip symbol, this object within the movie clip is not a movie clip. So it's actually a bitmap symbol. So I'm going to have to actually do again what I always do for my classic tween animations, is convert it to a movie clips symbol. So now it's a movie clip within a movie clip, okay? Basically something that you'll just want to get into the habit of. Anything you want to animate, just convert it to that movie clip symbol. Now I'm going to 25 again and inserting the keyframe. So this is going to prevent any potential issues that I might have. So then what I'll do on frame 25 is go, and actually, you know what else I'm going to do is going to go to frame 50, and I'm going to create another keyframe. So what I want to do is have this rotate to one point and then rotate back to the original. So on this part, I'm going to go modify, transform, and rotate. Let's say 90 degrees clockwise. Okay, and then at this point, let me go further on my timeline here. Let's just say this is going to be 100 frames within. I'll do another keyframe, and then here I'm going to go click on my object at frame 50. I'm going to go modify, transform, rotate clockwise 90 degrees again. Okay, and so now I have to do, this seems really far. Hold on one second. Huh. Oh, you know what? I'll bring this back to 75 because it's not going to be really even. So I'll just click and drag that back. If I want to delete these frames here on the end, this extra stuff, I'm just going to select them by just clicking and then shift clicking the frame that I want to delete, so the gap that I want to make, and then just control click and then hit remove frames. Alright, so I have 90-degree counterclockwise rotation here on this keyframe. Another, I'll have to do another 90-degree counterclockwise rotation here. So I'll do a transform and then 90-degree clockwise rotation there. So I have that one, and then this should bring me back to my original. Alright, so now that I have that ready, I'm going to apply my tweens. So control click classic tween, control click classic tween, control click classic tween, and then I will then jump out to scene 1. So when I double clicked my movie clip symbol and then converted this to a movie clip symbol within itself, and then did my tweens across the board in the timeline, I was making it in this point in the I guess this dimension, I suppose, in the job or project symbol 2. So this shows me kind of a breadcrumb trail of where I am within the document. So I'm inside of symbol 2. That's the timeline that I'm working in with all my tools. And if I click on scene 1 or this back button, it's going to jump me out one breadcrumb trail outside of the object to my main timeline. So now you can see the main timeline happening. Okay. Let me go ahead and do a save. And so theoretically then I should be able to see this object moving within the timeline. If I'm on the main timeline now, but you don't see that flower spinning, right? You know, when I'm doing my test here with the enter key. But what I'll do is export the movie. So go to export. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the wrong object. Go to export movie. And then hit desktop, right? That's just where I'm doing it now. And then I'm going to override the existing SWF file. And then now let's open it up. Oh, it's really hard to tell. Let me stop that motion on it. I will remove the tween. Remove it. Let's see. Remove classic tween. And I will actually need to, let's see, I'm going to delete all of these frames. Cut. Bring this over. So then this right here, do a test. Alright, so this, I'll delete these just to clean it up here. And then I will delete these. Alright. I have to make sure all of my frames are good, so because my video is going to constantly loop, so I don't want any blank space happening at the end. So I'll try and export this again. Let me just make sure that I have this object animating. Okay. So I'll go to export movie again, and then over save it, replace. So I have this flower piece kind of rotating independently of the video, and again, it's going in its own, it's moving in its own timeline within the video. If I were to say I want this flower object, I don't want anything on this timeline except for this flower, just remove frames altogether. Oop. I'll delete this guide layer. I'll delete everything. And then I only have one frame in my whole timeline. And I go export movie. I have a moving object with only one frame on the timeline. So again, this is just an independently moving object, and it's continuously on a loop. So if you have an object that you know, like let's say it's a vehicle or something moving, and you know it's constantly on the move. Just kind of undoing quite a few things right now. You know it's constantly on the move in your video, and you want to give the illusion that it's moving through space. You could just have that object static, have the wheels turning in a constant loop, and then just have the background moving past it as well. Something like that. Just thinking in layers will help you reduce the amount of work you'll have to put into executing that idea. So that's a lot of the reason why I want to see your concepts as well, because it's going to help us think through some of those instances that we could otherwise troubleshoot. So I'm going to then tighten this up a little bit. Well, one more thing I wanted to show you, though, is I wanted to show you some of the other options for tweening, okay? I'm going to get rid of some of the complexity in these layers. I'm just going to hide them, lock them and hide them. One of the, let's open up this flower and see what we got. Alright, so that's moving along the path. I'm going to delete this guide layer altogether. I'm just going to keep it real simple, okay? So this piece here, I'm just going to keep it real simple in the center. And what I want to do is demonstrate some of the other options you have. So defining the beginning, here, what I'm actually going to do is have this fade out, okay? So if I wanted this to fade out as it was growing, let's just say, I would have this at 100% opacity in the first frame, and then I would have it at 0% opacity in the last frame. So for any buttons that you want to fade in or something like that, or objects, a very easy way to do that is to click on that last frame that it's appearing on, and then go into your properties. Well, actually click your object too on the pasteboard, and go into your properties palette, and you have this option under color effect, and under style there's a couple different options. So a little terminology difference between Photoshop and Animate is that they don't call opacity here, they call it alpha. That's because they call opacity alpha in the web world. So if you wanted something to be like semi-transparent on the web, you would adjust its alpha in the code. So it's just a little terminology difference between digital and in print pieces, okay? So just remember, opacity is alpha. So what you could do is draw this slider after you select alpha in your style menu here, is draw your slider all the way down to 0%, right? So my last frame is at 0% alpha, first frame is 100%, and then that's just a simple fade out. And so very easily that can be done, okay? Keeping with the concept of defining your beginning and defining your end, this is how everything in this animation can work. So let me put the end at 100% alpha, and let me try another style attribute here. You can do some techniques that are used in Photoshop even, where as far as tint. So if I select tint, I can choose a tint color that I could change this flower object to, or I could, let me go ahead and use white. I could actually adjust these sliders even as well. So if I wanted to increase or decrease some of the reds or the greens, decreasing the greens, things like that, you can do that with these sliders too. Whatever I do here, then I'm going to go back and then see that change, because I already have my tween built. I mean, if I were to remove the tween and then reapply it, it would still have the same thing, where it would fill in all of the steps in between to get this color from going purple to going to this blue color that I wanted. So this is a little mix of Photoshop working as well. If I were to turn on my other flower, you can see that my other flower is still unchanged. It's still that instance of purple. Okay, so if I wanted to make that flower something different, I could change the alpha, or I could change the tint of it as well. So I can have just rainbow flowers going on, you know. And then it's all just filling in the animation for you. So that's another property you can do. I'll turn these guys off. What else? Only thing to keep in mind is that if I choose a property in my style panel here, and let's say I want to go to my alpha and 0%, you can see that I lost my tint. So you have to be really selective to choose that. If I wanted to keep my tint, but then make this tint actually like fade out, I could go over here and then do insert keyframe. And then in this tween animation, I could add a tween, classic tween. And then here I could say this instance of the object, I'm going to make it fade out. But I'll have to do it pretty quickly because my alpha is removing that as well. So let me see if I can cut these frames, make it just disappear very quickly. Something like that. All right. All right, I think that's good for today. I wanted to show masking later on, but I will not do